Welcome to the Campbells.
It's All Good Podcast.
Welcome to the Campbells. It's All Good Podcast, where our focus is God, healthy marriage, joy, and life. Join us every episode as we share various aspects of healthy relationship goals that we have set for ourselves, provide practical tips for creating the healthy marriage we desire, and how we live life together in God-ordained joy. Jesus, others, yourself. Hey, everybody. It's your girl, Linnea.
And Brian.
And welcome back to the Campbells.
It's All Good Podcast.
So we are coming to you with episode 12, Knock, Knock, A Peek Behind the Door. And so it just made me think of that song, that old school song, like, who's that peeping in the window? Oh, nobody knows. Whatever
That's definitely old school. I remember the song. I don't know who wrote it. I don't remember the lyrics, but now I can't get that song out of my head. Thanks a lot.
That's what the title made me think of. So we're going to just dig into a peek behind the door, and we're going to discuss more of what that entails and what we mean by that. But I want to start off with some popular quotes that we have heard, that we've seen on social media. Here's some. So let's see if some of these relate to you all as well, too. It looks too good to be true. Hashtag relationship goals. You're only in the honeymoon phase. They look like a red flag to me. So we're going to unpack some of those quotes. We're going to talk a little bit more, like I said, what it means to the meaning behind a peek behind the door.
Yeah, so, when you think about that, knock, a peek behind the door, what are you looking at? Mm-hmm. So in relationships, you have to write your own story. You can't allow anybody else to tell you or define what your relationship looks like. People have plenty of opinions, and opinions are fine. But when it comes to a relationship, what you see outside the house in some relationships is not what you see inside the house. I remember there was some reality show that Linnea was watching, because she does the reality shows. I do not. And it was a couple, and they were doing like great. I'm talking millionaire status, doing great. And everybody thought things were fine whenever they left their house. Mm-hmm. But when they came back home, they were not even speaking to each other. They were in separate parts of the house. They couldn't stand each other. But in order to keep that lifestyle and to keep their fanfare following them, they had to put on that facade that everything was great. But behind closed doors, they probably were both going through hell.
Yeah, and that word, because that was the first word that came to my mind, living in a facade, living to the standards that we think that people want us to live in the forefront. And we should be living that in front of the door and behind the door. And so with writing our own stories, and that goes for anybody individually, any couple together, we have to think about those things that bring people together. We have to think about the conversations that were had. When it comes to marriage, many of us do participate in premarital counseling. Being with another person, we definitely have to be vulnerable. If we're keeping up our guard and things like that, many relationships might not be as successful or not successful at all because of those things. And so when we think about the peek behind the door, we're not saying that, people are smiling on the outside and inside they're dying, because we know that does happen, but we're saying that we don't know what it took for those couples behind the door to get to where they are, what you see outside of the door. So it takes a lot of things, like I was saying. And the main thing I know, when I can speak for Brian and I, was definitely the conversations that we've had. We've shared that in previous episodes with you all, how communicating and effective communicating is something that we strive for each and every day, so that we get better at communicating with one another. Definitely being vulnerable. I know before we did get married, we did participate in premarital counseling, and that just opened up a lot of different conversations or just things that we saw that were different between us, similarities between us, so that we would learn how to navigate those likes and those differences.
Yeah, so and listening to her talk about that, so you think about all kinds of things. So the premarital counseling, like she said, the different scenarios, and like, well, hey, have you thought about this? And there were so
Mm-hmm.
many aha moments for us
Yeah.
when we were going through that. That was like, you know what, we never did talk about that, or we didn't think about that, and it just led to a great conversation. And also with conversations, sometimes those conversations are those tough conversations,
Yeah.
those conversations where, look, let's turn the TV off, let's silence our phones, let's go to the table, we need to talk about this and get it all out there, just trying to figure out what does right look like, and how do we get back to back to square one, and how do we move forward. But that's again things that people don't see behind closed doors. And again, the disclaimer is, when we talk about these things, this does not necessarily reflect Brian and Linnea.
Mm-hmm.
These are just things that we have seen over the years, and over just listening to people, looking at people that, we just know and we hear. And so we just thought this was a good conversation to have.
Yeah, it definitely is a good conversation to have. It made me think about, like you said, sometimes those tough conversations. Definitely in our case with, getting married later in life, some of those conversations we didn't have to have. It came to my mind like, where do we need to live so that we have our children going to the best schools, or thinking about other things that a lot of couples do endure when they have gotten married a lot younger, maybe in their 20s and 30s, where life is just starting out. So some of those things we kind of fast forward to. And so there was other conversations that we had to have that were like, what happens when one of us gets sick, or what happens to one of us, or what are we going to do, if one of us passes away before the other. Those conversations that you don't tend to have in your 20s and 30s as a couple, maybe later 30s into your 40s, 50s, and even a little bit later. And so, those are definitely conversations that we have to have, just because at the stage of life that we're in and the stage of our relationship as well.
And with us not having kids together, so we also have to talk about the children that we do have.
Mm-hmm.
I've got three sons, she has a son. So just talking about, what does that look like? What happens if one of them needs to come and stay with us? What does
Yeah.
that look like? How are we going to handle that? What's going to be the expectation of them? So just to have those conversations in advance, just so if we find ourselves in that situation, we'll somewhat, we've already talked about, and we've already kind of got a plan in place, or at least had a conversation about what that would look like. So just, it's always good to have a conversation.
It is. It is. So I'm thinking about, like, as we move along, I was thinking about one of those quotes I said, hashtag relationship goals. So we saw that, especially, I think that became very popular back in 2020, maybe a little bit earlier, with certain celebrity couples who were getting together. We know that there are famous preachers and things like that who have written books about relationship goals and things like that. And so that became so popular. And I know a lot of us fell into that, like, oh, so and so's relationship goals, this couple's relationship goals. And then we would see the negative side where maybe those couples didn't last, or, things weren't going the way that, we saw or thought that they would go from things that we would see or hear. And so I know Brian and I, we just like coined the phrase, our relationship goals. So what works for Linnea and Brian Campbell is the relationship goal for Linnea and Brian Campbell. We don't try to mimic or mock anybody else. We're just doing life, living life the way that God intended for us, and how Linnea and Brian move and navigate. And so when I think of that term, we just try to stay away from things that we see other couples doing, because at the end of the day, just like us individually, even as a couple, what is for us is for us. What is for somebody else is for somebody else. And so when we decided to make that our life's mission for our relationship, that was a game changer, don't you think, Brian?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, you cannot um, match or mirror your relationship after
Mm-hmm.
someone else, because there's so many factors that go into a relationship.
Yeah.
There's financial concerns, there's children concerns, there's her concerns, my concerns. And it makes me think about something that we've talked about, and she's heard me say this a few times. This is my opinion, Brian Campbell's opinion. I don't think anybody in a relationship gets 100% of what they want.
Yeah.
You have to find the person that will get you as close to 100% as you possibly can get, and then figure out what are you missing that's keeping you from being at 100%, and then decide, are you willing to compromise on those things, or is that something that, this one or two things that's keeping me from 100%, I'm not going to bend on, so maybe that's not the person for you. But
Yeah.
I just don't believe that you get 100% of what you want. You get as close as you can, compromise on the others, but and have that conversation. Lanier and I talk all the time about, you know, hey, what I'm not getting from her, what she's not getting from me, or anything like that, and we have that conversation, and then we try and make it better.
Yeah, because I think that's an unrealistic expectation to think that you would ever get 100% from anybody, because that would mean perfection. None of us are perfect. And so it makes me think of like a well known movie that many of us are familiar with, where they talked about the 80-20 rule. And that always resonated with me, because I was like, yeah, you know what? That, it might be like that. It might be 80-20. It might be 95-5 some days. It might be, whatever percentage to equal out that 100 together. But my thing is, I think that we should always set goals within expectations of our partners, because we know, and I say this to Brian all the time, we people are multifaceted, meaning that we change all the time. Studies have shown that on average we change every 10 years, and I think even within that 10 years there's a lot of differences that we might gain, or things that we used to like that we no longer like anymore, even within those 10 years. So again, with being multifaceted, even the percentage of expectations from one another, or things that we do, changes along the way. And I think as people, we have to adapt to how our partners change over the years.
Because I know for a fact that I have changed. I changed a lot, and I
Yeah,
know.
me too.
So please pray for Lanier, because I know I changed, because I'm 53. I'm set in my ways on a lot of things, and it's just like, oh, I just don't want to do this or do that. But we work through that though, and that's, again, it leads to a conversation, and we work through it, and then I try to get better. She tries to get better, and we just have fun with it.
Yeah, because like we've said, we are complete opposites in that aspect. Where yeah, I'm gaining some age, but I'm also fighting it. Like I'm like, no, I am young. Like my mind is young, my body's young, my spirit is young, and so I'm like, come on, Brian, we're gonna try this, we're gonna do this. And sometimes he's looking at me like, I don't know about that.
I'm an early riser. 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm up. I got the TV on. I'm catching up on news. I done fixed me some breakfast. She's knocked out. And then, we get to about 8, 9 o'clock at night. I'm winding down. I'm ready to go to bed. Ding! The bright light Lanier has come on. We got to watch a movie. Let's do this. Let's do that. No, I'm going to go to sleep. I've been up since 4 or 5 this morning.
Oh goodness, yeah. And so I mean, it's working for us, because like we talked about, we do respect one another in that aspect. And sometimes I find myself up early with him, and sometimes I see that he's up later with me.
Yeah.
So we do definitely compromise, and I don't even know if it's the compromise. I just think that we enjoy being around one another, so I'll make that extra effort to maybe get up with him one day. Not all the time, but to get up early with him and spend some time with him earlier in the morning, and he'll make that time later in the night to spend that time with me. So,
but who wouldn't get up for breakfast if her husband's cooking her breakfast that morning? Of course, that's why she get up. Don't let her fool you. She gets up so she can eat the breakfast and then go back to sleep.
I want to spend time with you too, babe.
Yeah, okay.
And so I just think that those are our relationship goals, okay? And so then we think about like those negative things that we have heard, and we either somebody has said to us, or just hearing people say it, or we've seen it typed on social media, things like that, where we've seen the quote, "It's too good. It looks too good to be true, and they look like a red flag to me." Excuse me, and that you're only in the honeymoon phase. And so we have to, like Brian said earlier, not let anybody define what our relationship should look like. And I'm not saying our, just the Campbells, but the Jacksons, the Phillips, the whomever your last name is, right? Because your relationship is what you and your spouse want your relationship to look like. And so we know that we have to put in the work and things like that. Have we had moments where we might be a red flag? Yeah, we're people. Do we have moments when we're green flags? Yeah, we're people. So we have those good moments, we have those not so good moments. When it comes to it looks too good to be true, I just think that sometimes when people see that people are actually getting along and maybe whatever, wherever they are in their lives, that sometimes they try to project that energy onto others. And some of us can be very guilty of that. And so for Brian and I, we just have a no toxic zone. Like when we see things that bring forth toxicity and things like that, we don't want that. Have we been through those things before? Definitely yes. But those are things that for our relationship that we're like, it's a no-no. So let's reel it in, whatever we need to do, because we don't do toxic over here and we don't have toxicity in our space because we will remove ourselves quickly.
A 3-strand cord has no room for anyone else.
There we go.
Amen. So that right there is where we stand, and that's what we believe. That 3-strand cord is what it is, and that's it. Amen. And if you're not one of those three, then what you say has nothing to do with us, because everybody has an opinion and you're entitled to yours, but we have to figure out what works for us.
Yes.
We have to figure out what works for the Campbells, because that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Amen. Because it makes me think of, I can just hear your voice as clear as day. Like, is this part of the Brian Campbell algorithm?
Once I put it in the Brian algorithm, does this affect me? It's either yes or no. If it's yes, I'm all in. If it's no, I'm done. Yep. Move on to the next subject.
Moving on, because it goes back to that old quote that hurt people hurt people. And I don't think that people just genuinely want to hurt people, but I think just in things that have happened in our lives, whether it's things that were toxic, generational things that may have been addressed or not addressed, things that, where people had dealt with trauma, that hurt can sometimes project onto others. And so when we think about that sometimes there's just some people that don't want to see us do well, or they feel that we think, and when I say we, I'm not just talking about Brian and I, I'm just saying we in general, that we think that we're better than them. And that is never the case. Again, like Brian said, in our algorithm, we're focused on what Brian and Lania are doing. We are definitely going to include those that the Lord has said, hey, I want you to sow a seed into those people. And meaning a seed could be anything, whether, it's monetary, whether it's speaking to people, whether it's, encouraging somebody. It's a lot of different things when we sow seeds into others. And so if that's part of the algorithm that God has intended for us, then they're a part of that. But when it's things that, like Brian said, that are not for us, then we remove it or we remove ourselves. And we do that, I think, and any couple should do that because you want to protect your relationship. We were gifted each other. And so we don't want to see anything come in between that. And we will fight like hell to make sure that will not happen.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what it stands on. Again, 3-strand cord. We stand on what we believe. We believe on where we stand. And we just have to stay there. And that's what we believe on. And, you can go do what you need to do for you and your relationship, but we're going to do what we need to do for our relationship. Yeah. And that's kind of how it needs to be. So I also have to think about, there are situations that, let's keep some things in mind and keep some things in perspective. Obviously, there is no place for like domestic violence and all that kind of stuff, all these abuses and things that you see on TV. Absolutely no place for that. And if you find yourself in that, I would tell you to please seek some type of help, counseling,
yes.
Do whatever you need to do to get better and get out of that situation. Because there's a term that Lania, she hears me say it, and I know I definitely got this from the military, and she doesn't like this term. That is, hey, if you like it, I love it. And so, I've heard that a lot over the years. but that doesn't apply to all situations. Obviously, I would
Yeah.
not like, I would definitely wouldn't love, domestic violence
Yes, somebody being
relationships and
harmed.
things like that. But you don't know what's going on in people's relationships, and if someone shares something like that with you, I would ask you to please, take some form of action. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, then go to somebody you know who will, so
Yeah.
that that person can get the help and the support that they possibly need.
Yeah, definitely, because it makes me think like that the enemy just does not like marriage, and it comes in such subtle ways. One way that I see all the time is marriage is just a piece of paper. I hear that all the time. No, it is not. That is a lie of the enemy. Like marriage is a covenant. Marriage is something that it can bring forth just such beautiful things. And number one, it brings forth the ministry of Jesus Christ, that love, to lay down your life for somebody else, to love somebody unconditionally, not with conditions. And I know for our marriage, for me, it has taught me so much about really dying to myself, things that I like felt that this was the right way, and even things that I'm still working with, because I love my husband. I love Brian. I love to see him smile, and I love to see him happy, and I love to see him enjoying life and the joy that he has had since we have gotten together. That just, it fills my heart up. And when I think how I feel, then I know God feels like 50 times more than what I can feel just as a human being. And so when people have said, I've heard people say or write down that marriage is just a piece of paper, it is not. How many times have we even looked at our piece of paper with our, our marriage certificate?
I got nothing. I don't even know where it's at.
Because that's not what it is. We are one another's cheerleaders, best friends, partners. We might not have children together, but we do have children together, because in our mind, when we lock in, our family's locked in, right? Things that we are going to do in the future, things that we're doing right now. All of that is a part of our marriage covenant. And so I know, and Brian knows, we are with the right person. Did it take us some time to get to one another? Yeah. Life be life, and life happens. But God is faithful, and He does things strategically in the way that He does, even when we have made mistakes or we did things different than the plan that He had for us. And so again, it goes back to, you just never know what's behind that door of how we got to where we are now. And that's for every couple. So again, we just have to know that, we shouldn't focus on the hurt. We shouldn't focus on what the naysayers or things are saying like that. And it takes me to a Bible verse here, and I want to share this with you all. James chapter 3, verse 16, and then also Galatians 5:26. So James chapter 3:16 says, "For wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind." Galatians 5, chapter 5:26 says, "Let us not be conceited or provoke one another or be jealous of one another." And I love those scriptures because it keeps us accountable, that we should just focus on what it is that we have been given, what it is that we are doing as a couple, how we want to maneuver as a couple, what the Lord is, speaking us to do as a couple, that there's no comparison, because comparison kills, that we are not competing, because competing is worthless, unless it's like a sport, you have a little good competition, but we're talking about that competition where we're trying to get ahead of somebody, because that's not what Brian and I are doing. We are working together as a team. Teamwork makes the dream work, and that's what we are going to stand on. And then we're always going to be led by the Lord and what our next venture is, because we have learned that when we try to do things our way, it's been more than likely an epic fail.
Yeah, so one of the things that reminds me of T.D. Jakes gave a quote. This has been some years ago. He talked about how people don't mind you shouting, just don't own the land that you're shouting on. So if you apply that to this, people will allow you, or they have expectations of you, and their expectations of you. Think about it from a relationship standpoint: is this is where you should be, or this is how far your relationship should go, or this is what your relationship should look like, but they don't get to dictate that. So you can shout all you want on your land, but just don't own the land. But sometimes you have to own the land. Take it by force if you have to, but you have to own the land. And so that's why it's important that you never know when you do that knock knock, a peek behind the door. You have no idea sometimes what's going on behind the
Yeah,
door.
all the work that has been put in, all the conversations, everything that has led up to where you see people, you know, dwelling in the fruits of their labor. You know, I mean, there's so many couples that I see doing amazing things, like just amazing things. And I'm like, God, that was for them to do. You know, I'm so happy for them because I'm seeing, you know, and sometimes I know just a little fragment of what was going on behind that door, but only they truly know, you know, everything. And so when they are able to share outside of that door or that window, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. I love to see what I'm seeing with so many couples right now, even including ourselves, because we can't take the credit. It's all God. God, baby, God.
So there's another quote just came in my head, and it talks about, you see my glory, but you don't know my story. You don't know what it took for me to get to where I am now. All you see and hear is what you're seeing and hearing right now. Well, basically hearing right now, but that's all you know, unless you know me as a person.
Yeah.
And then, even those who know me as a person, very few know all the struggles that had to go through to get here. So it means a lot to be connected with the right person, and then
Yes.
to be able to have the same, what you see outside is what we have inside.
Amen.
And that means a lot.
It does mean a lot. So we thank you guys for tuning in to episode 12. We hope that you have gotten a takeaway from Knock Knock, a peek behind the door. Please remember we have our June quarterly blog coming out soon. So if you have signed on to our email subscription, then you will be receiving that in the next few days. We thank you for all the ratings and reviews that people have been leaving for us on all of our streaming platforms. We cannot do this without you all. We know that God gave us this platform to, just talk about Him, to talk about relationships, marriage, but also that we want to know that we are touching the masses. And what we mean by that is that you have a takeaway from what we're talking about in any of the episodes. So love to everybody, and we'll catch you on the next episodes. And remember, we're the Campbells.
It's all good podcast.